The shop was dark when Do-jin arrived, and he did not light the lamp right away. He stood in the doorway and let his eyes adjust, listening to the silence the way you listen to a bearing before you trust it, for the absence of something wrong. 4 years of work lay on that bench, not stacked, not piled, assembled. The drivetrain sat in its cradle with the quiet authority of a thing that had been made correctly, and in the gray pre-dawn light it looked almost small. 4 years, he said to no one, to the empty shop, to the bench. He walked to it and set both hands on the edge of the cradle without touching the assembly. All right, let's see if you fit. Cho Yeong arrived first, as she usually did, carrying a tray covered with cloth. She set it on the side bench without ceremony and pulled the cloth back. 12 bearings, each nested in its own wooden socket, each with a small paper tag bearing Seo-rin's seal. Do-jin leaned toward them instinctively, the old habit of inspection, and Cho Yeong spoke without looking up from the tray. That tray's certified, all 12. Don't squint at them, teacher, you'll only insult them. He straightened. You taught me there was such a thing as round, she said, lifting the first bearing and turning it once in her fingers before setting it aside. You never could grind it. That's all right. Somebody has to know it's possible before anybody can do it. That was your job. This is mine. She said it without cruelty and without particular warmth. She said it the way she said most things, as a measurement. Do-jin watched her hands move over the tray and thought about the first time he had tried to explain roundness to her. Not the word, not the concept, but the standard, the idea that a surface could be held to account by a number rather than by feel. She had looked at him then the way a person looks at someone describing a color they've never seen. Now her hands knew things his never would. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would improve on what she had already said. Pyo Eun-ha came in drawing curves in the air with one finger, the way she always did when she was working through a ratio. She had been doing it since before she walked through the door, Do-jin suspected, since somewhere on the road between her workshop and his, the mathematics still moving in her hands while her feet carried her along without needing supervision. 41 teeth to 17 for your first reduction, she said, not as a question, not as a report, but as a statement of something she found beautiful. Prime to prime, so no tooth ever meets the same tooth twice, and the wear spreads even across a lifetime. Do-jin knew the gear train. He had sketched the first version of it years ago on the back of a charcoal-smudged board, the proportions rough, the reasoning sound but incomplete. He had not known the prime-to-prime principle when he drew it. He had not known it when he taught her. You did not teach me that, Pyo said, her fingers still tracing something invisible. You could not have. You did not know it. I found it. She looked at him then, directly, with the particular calm of someone who has made peace with a complicated thing. You gave me the door, Han Do-jin. Do not apologize for not having the key. Nobody keeps the key after they've given away the door. He thought about the door. He thought about the years she had spent on the other side of it, in the mathematics of involute curves and contact ratios and the geometry of load distribution across a tooth face, going deeper into that country than he had ever gone or could go. She had not merely learned what he taught. She had gone past the edge of what he knew and kept walking, and the territory she had mapped out there was hers, not his. He nodded once. She accepted that and turned to the bench. Baek Tae-ho came in smelling of the forge, which was to say he came in smelling the way the forge smelled at the 5th hour of the morning, when the fire had been running long enough to settle into its character. He was carrying the shaft, the finished shaft, grain flow forged. The steel worked along the axis of its future stress so that the crystalline structure followed the shape rather than crossing it. He set it on the bench with the care of a man setting down something he has made and knows is right. He tapped it once with his knuckle, lightly, and the shaft rang. Not a clunk, not a thud, a ring, clear, sustained, the sound of steel that has been worked correctly and knows it. Grain follows the shape, doesn't break across it, Tae-ho said, listening to the note fade. Listen, that's a shaft that'll take a crankshaft's beating for 50 years. Do-jin listened. He had taught Tae-ho the why of it, carbon content, the relationship between heat and time, the way the grain structure of steel responds to temperature and deformation, the theory of what a correctly forged shaft should be. He had given him the framework. But the framework was not the same as the knowledge that lived in Tae-ho's hands now, the knowledge of the exact moment to pull the steel from the fire, not a temperature on a chart, not a color from a reference, but a breath, a feel, an accumulated certainty built from years of listening to metal. You gave me the why, Tae-ho said. Carbon, heat, time, but the when, the exact breath to pull it from the fire, that's not in any book you brought. That's mine now. He set his hand on the shaft and looked at Do-jin steadily. I earned the right to not be able to explain it. Do-jin understood that. He had felt it himself, once in his grandfather's shop, the moment when a process stopped being a set of steps he was following and became something he simply knew. You could not write that down. You could only earn it, and then it was yours, and no one could take it from you because it lived in your body rather than in your head. Mok Jae was already at the bench when the others arrived, which surprised no one. He had probably been there since before Do-jin, having let himself in through the side door, with the quiet efficiency of a man who treats every workshop as his own, because every workshop eventually needs something he can make. He had a fixture on the bench beside the cradle, a wooden cradle within a cradle, precisely fitted, with a stop block at one end. Do-jin looked at it. He looked at his own original sketch, pinned to the board above the bench. He looked at the fixture again. Your sketch had the shaft going in before the bearing, teacher, Mok Jae said, would have galled the race on the way past. Do-jin looked at the sketch again. He saw it immediately. The sequence, the interference, the way the shaft's shoulder would have dragged across the bearing race during assembly and left a score mark that would have started wearing from the first rotation, a small error. The kind of error that would not have been obvious until the machine failed, and by then the cause would have been buried under months of use. So I flipped the order and built the cradle to make sure nobody can do it your way by accident. Mok Jae said it without any particular emphasis, the way he said most things, as a description of work done. I'm not correcting you. I'm doing the job you trained me for. You said the best tool makes the next person's mistake impossible. This is me, believing you. Do-jin looked at the fixture for a long moment. The stop block would prevent the shaft from being inserted before the bearing was seated. The cradle geometry enforced the correct sequence physically, without requiring the assembler to know the reason. It was elegant in the way that only truly useful things are elegant, not decorative, not clever for its own sake, but shaped exactly to the problem it solved, and no further. He had said that. He had said it years ago. Probably without thinking about it particularly, the way you say things that seem obvious to you. Mok Jae had been listening. Seo-rin arrived last, carrying her ledger and the certification stamps, and she went to the bench the way she always went to a bench. Not to look at the thing itself first, but to look at the documentation, to confirm that what the paper said matched what the metal was. She checked each part against its record with the methodical patience of someone who has made peace with the fact that trust is built from evidence rather than from faith. When she was done, she closed the ledger and looked at Do-jin. Bearings to grade, gears to grade, shafts to grade, all of it written so the next shop never has to meet any of you to build it. She set the ledger on the bench beside the assembly. That's what I bring, Do-jin, not a part, the proof that none of you are irreplaceable. She said it without apology, because she did not think it required one. It's the kindest thing I know how to make, she said, a machine that doesn't need its makers to keep existing. Do-jin thought about that. A machine that could be built from paper alone, by craftsmen in a daughter town who had never met any of them, who had never heard Do-jin's voice, or felt Tae-ho's shaft ring under their knuckle, or watched Cho Yeong's hands move over a tray of certified bearings. A machine that carried none of them forward except as a standard written in numbers, not legend, civilization. They assembled it together, which is to say they each did their part in the sequence Mok Jae's fixture enforced, and the assembly went cleanly until it didn't. The fit was wrong, not badly wrong. Every part was within its certified grade, every dimension inside its tolerance, but the drivetrain turned stiffly, with a resistance that should not have been there. They all felt it at the same moment, the way people who have spent years learning to listen to metal feel the same wrong notes simultaneously. Pyo Eun-ha was already thinking before anyone spoke. Tolerance stack, she said. Every part inside its grade, but all leaning the same way. Take 2/10,000ths off the gear shoulder, not the bore. The bore's load-bearing. Cho Yeong had her hand on the gear housing. She moved her fingers slowly along the shoulder face, reading it, felt it. There. She looked across the bench. Mok Jae already had the scraper in his hand. 2/10,000ths off the shoulder, done. He worked for perhaps 4 minutes. The scraper moved in the short, controlled strokes of a man who has internalized the feel of the cut, not removing material so much as correcting the surface's conversation with the part beside it. When he set the scraper down, he did not check his work with a gauge. He looked at Cho Yeong. Try it now. Do-jin had not spoken. He had watched, and he had understood the diagnosis before Pyo named it. A tolerance stack-up. The phenomenon where parts that are each individually correct accumulate their small errors in the same direction and produce a combined error that none of them would show alone. He had taught them about it. He had explained the geometry of it, the way GD and T accounting worked, the reason you could not simply add tolerances and assume the worst case was impossible. But he had not spoken because they had not needed him to. The diagnosis was Pyo's. The feel was Cho Yeong's. The correction was Mok Jae's. They had moved through the problem the way a well-made machine moves through its cycle, each part doing its function, the whole thing arriving at the right place, without requiring any single element to carry the others. Mok Jae turned the crank. The drivetrain moved. The shaft spun. The gear train took the input and stepped it down through 41 teeth to 17, prime to prime, the load spreading across the mesh the way Pyo had calculated it would, and the whole assembly ran with a smoothness that was almost disorienting, because the room was quiet. Not quiet the way a room is quiet when people stop talking. Quiet the way a room is quiet when the machine in it is doing exactly what it was built to do and has nothing to announce about it. It turns, Mok Jae said, and his voice had something in it that Do-jin had not heard from him before. Not excitement exactly, but a kind of wondering. Listen to it. There's no sound. 4 years and the loudest thing in the room is us breathing. It just turns. Cho Yeong put her hand on the spinning shaft with her eyes closed. She held it there for a long moment, feeling the rotation through her palm, reading the surface the way she read everything, not with her eyes but with the accumulated sensitivity of years of grinding and lapping and learning to hear what metal says when it moves against metal. Smooth, she said, all the way through. She kept her hand there. That's everyone's hands at once, that is. That's all of us, turning. Do-jin stood back from the bench and watched them. Cho Yeong with her eyes closed and her hand on the shaft. Mok Jae still turning the crank with the careful rhythm of a man who does not want to stop. Pyo Eun-ha watching the gear mesh with the expression she wore when mathematics became visible. Seo-rin writing in her ledger, recording the moment the way she recorded everything, turning it from experience into evidence. Surpassed, he thought, every one of them. He had known it was coming. He had built toward it deliberately, the way you build toward a structural load, not hoping it won't arrive, but designing the frame to carry it when it does. The whole point of teaching was to make yourself unnecessary. The whole point of the seed was the forest. Good, he thought. That was the whole point. That was always the whole point. Tae-ho came to stand beside him, which Do-jin noticed only when the older man spoke. Hurts a little, doesn't it, being passed? Do-jin looked at him. Tae-ho gave a short laugh, not unkind, not at Do-jin's expense, but the laugh of a man who has already been through the thing he is describing and come out the other side. I felt it the day that girl ground a surface flatter than my best, and I'd been at the anvil since before she was born. He watched Cho Yeong's hand on the spinning shaft. Then I felt the bigger thing. They can't take from us what we already gave them. We're not less because they're more. That's the one trade where you get richer giving it all away. When did you get wise, Do-jin said, you old fraud? Tae-ho smiled. It was the smile of a man who has earned the right to it. About the time I stopped blaming the gods and started reading Seo-rin's numbers. You were there. You did that. Do-jin thought about the first time he had met Baek Tae-ho, the forge master who had blamed the failing veil for everything, who had looked at Do-jin's explanations of carbon content and heat treatment with the particular hostility of a man whose faith is being questioned. He thought about the long argument of years between them, the slow conversion, the morning Tae-ho had come to him with Seo-rin's measurement records in his hand and said, without preamble, "Show me again how to read these." He thought about what it had taken to get from there to here. He did not say any of that. He just stood beside Tae-ho and watched the drivetrain turn. It was Seo-rin who named what came next, because naming things precisely was her function, and she was good at it. The body's done, she said, closing her ledger. It turns, it's true, it's written down. She looked at the empty space at the center of the assembly, the mounting point, the void where the power source would eventually sit. That space in the middle is the whole reason we built any of it, isn't it? The heart. The heart, Do-jin said. He looked at the space. He had been looking at it, in one form or another, for 4 years, the absence at the center of everything they were building toward. The body of the machine was complete now. The bearings ran true. The gears meshed correctly, prime to prime, wearing evenly across a lifetime. The shafts were forged with the grain following the load. The fixtures enforced the correct assembly sequence. The documentation meant any daughter town could build it from paper alone, without ever meeting any of them. The body was done. Only the heart remained. A fire we light on purpose, he said, thousands of times a minute, and make push instead of just burn. He said it slowly, the way you say something you have been carrying for a long time and are finally setting down in the right place. Everything until now was learning to build a body that could survive it. He looked at the drivetrain turning silently in its cradle, all of them in it, all of their hands at once. We're ready to try, he said. God help us, we're finally ready to try for the engine itself.